Mexico City. After almost a year and a half we haven't seen you over here. We are very, very happy to listen to you again. And one of the questions that come to mind is, why is so important for the world and the Jewish people to have criminals or war criminals brought to justice and not just killing them like many people used to do in the past?
I think it's less important for the Jewish people that we bring these people to justice than it is for the world. And the reason it's important for the world is because this serves as a warning to all future perpetrators of genocide that they may not reach the end of their days living in tranquility. After all, today, if we are prosecuting the people who were guards in camps, they're old men in their 80s and 90s. So in terms of achieving justice in their lifetime, it doesn't mean anything. But what it does is it serves as a powerful warning to anybody who perpetrates genocide that you will not be able to die in your own bed, and you will not be able to live out your life without being afraid that you're going to face the bar of justice. That's why it's important, and that's why Germany itself is bringing 92-year-old guards to justice.
Okay, very interesting. And how do you relate after we learned the lessons of the Holocaust, where we lost 6 million, 50 million, including from other countries, and since then we have genocide after genocide. Today we have Darfur, today we have Syria, and looks like the world doesn't understand or wants to learn the lessons, no?
Progress is slight, but there's progress. What is the difference between genocide then and genocide now? In the 1940s, you could say you don't know. The distance between Europe and the United States in those eras was massive. The amount of information we got was information that was delayed. We have a telegram that was sent on August 29th, 1942, by Gerhard Riegner to Stephen Wise. It says there is under consideration in the Führer's headquarters a plan for the final solution to the Jewish problem. We as historians know that the plan was not under discussion, it was under implementation. The decision had been operative since January of 1942. Belzec had been in operations since February. Sobibor had been in operation till the spring. In July, Treblinka came into operation. And between the 23rd of July and the 21st of September, 265,000 Jews were deported from Warsaw to Treblinka alone. So it wasn't that it was under discussion, it was happening at that point, and we didn't know anything about it. Today's humanity knows. We know because we have internet. We know because we have email. We know because we have satellite photos. We know because we have Google Maps. We can see events occurring almost in real time, and still the world does nothing. And part of that is an absence of political will, but part of that also is the fact that one day our Secretary of State, who was James Baker, said of what was happening in the former Yugoslavia, we don't have a dog in that fight. The reality is that today, at least, leaders of governments feel embarrassed by what they don't do on genocide. A generation ago, they didn't feel embarrassed. Today, there are international legal mechanisms to bring people to trial. A generation ago, you had to invent the idea of Nuremberg. But if you ask me what it means to live in our world, to be an ethical and sensitive human being, you have to be ashamed of the world in which we live in. Nothing less than being ashamed of the world in which we live in.
So the question begs the question is, are we living in a world without morality, are we fighting a lost cause? Or is there a really hope that someday we will not have Darfur or Syria or you name it?
I think the answer to that is we have to fight. and you can't presume that victory is going to be easy, and you can't presume that victory is going to be immediate. But you have to presume that if we do nothing, then the perpetrator will keep on killing. And if we do something, then there is the possibility of stopping this action. Part of what we can do is we can do refugee action to help the people. So in Darfur, you have major refugee action. In Syria, you have major refugee action. Part of what we really should have is an international military force that it can intervene in the case of genocide. But nations are unwilling to give up their sovereignty, and we see that the issue in the United Nations, especially on an issue like Syria, is 5 nations have veto power. The United States says we must do something. The Security Council says we must do something, and then Russia says niet. They veto it. And consequently, the United Nations has proved itself impotent and has proved itself unable to act in this. Worse was the genocide in Rwanda. In Rwanda, Belgium had troops on the ground. France had troops on the ground. The United Nations had troops on the ground. Belgium took its troops out. France took its troops out. The United Nations essentially confined its troops to base. So genocide was occurring right there, and nobody did anything. And the United States brought people in, brought Marines in to rescue Americans, but not to stop the genocide. And that was a genocide by machete. Now, to kill with a machete, you have to stand as close as I am to you. You can't be across the room. You can't be 50 feet away. You have to be right next to the person. And this was a primitive weapon, and yet they killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in 100 days. And it was stopped by a ragtag force that had come in from exile in Burundi.
So what we might, before I can turn it over to my friend here, is the Jewish communities all over the world, and maybe also some of them, especially the big ones, say that they are tired of listening about the Holocaust. They are fed up with the Holocaust story. And still, look Simposio. What do you think we do this kind of thing?
The Jewish community suffer from what we call Holocaust fatigue, because the Holocaust imposes a burden. And it's also a difficult burden because the burden says that we really believe that it would be never again. That if we told our story about the Shoah, then the world would never again commit such a crime. And what we see is the world is committing crimes not that are the same, but are analogous again and again and again. It also does something else to the Jewish community, which is some people see the Shoah as teaching us that the whole world is against us. That doesn't mean there's not anti-Semitism, but the whole world is not against us. This is not 1933, this is not 1939, this is not 1944. I edited a book called Not Your Father's Anti-Semitism, with the idea that if you fight the last war, you lose the next war. The anti-Semitism of today is different than the anti-Semitism of the Nazi era. And even when we had people who were professed anti-Semites, I said something that was very unpopular in the Jewish community. I said Ahmadinejad is not Hitler. By saying he's not Hitler doesn't mean I'm saying he's good.
Right.
Hitler ruled over 22 countries, dominated one of the most powerful nations in the history of the world, controlled an army that was massive. And if you ask yourself, what about Ahmadinejad and the Iranians? And again, Ahmadinejad has gone to the dustbin of history. You have to ask yourself a very interesting question. If you had to bet your life on whether Iran would attack Israel or Israel would attack Iran, what would you bet your life on? And the very fact that you can ask the question means that the Jewish community doesn't face the Shoah. We face other problems, but not the Shoah. There was no Jewish army, there was no Jewish state. There was not a serious amount of Jewish power to counteract this. And the idea, and anybody who says, for example, a retreat to the borders of 67 is a retreat to the borders of Auschwitz, makes it looks and sounds ridiculous. Because how many tanks did the Jews have in 39 and 41? How many rockets? How many planes? How many army? The answer is none. And consequently, we have a different power structure today. One other interesting thing, and I think of this because this year was the 40th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. When the Yom Kippur War was fought, we feared that power would be in the control of natural resources. Power in the beginning of the 21st century is in the ability to control and manage information. And with that, the Jews are enormous power. You know, you have in the United States something called the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. But if you want to have the BDS movement succeed, then people are going to have to give up their iPhones. They're going to have to give up their Apple computers. They're going to have to give up cell phones. They're going to have to give up Waze. They're going to have to give up vaccines. They're going to have to give up they're going to have to give up Intel. They're going to have to give up Microsoft. In the contemporary world, Israel is one of the great contributors in the management of information and the control of information. Think also as to, and by the way, Israel also now is on the brink of becoming a major provider of energy and also a major provider of water. Israel is now engaged in something very interesting. It's engaged in a desalinization program, which is to take the salt out of ocean water, that will provide water to Jordan, provide water to the Palestinians, and provide water to the Israelis, maybe even to the Turks, and therefore be in a situation of solving what had previously been the two most difficult problems for Israel, energy and water. So we face a very different world, but the Jewish community is tired, but part of what it can't afford to be is tired.
So based on what you just said about controlling information, being that Israel was just cataloged about the 13th economy of the world in terms of digital information power, and given the survivors are basically going to be disappearing in less than 10 years, the same as perpetrators of the war, how can we fight the revisionists? Because there are really strong movements like Snyder in the U.S. and other people.
No, let's divide.
That way.
Number one, hardcore Holocaust denial is done. Hardcore Holocaust denial had a great defeat with the defeat of David Irving. And I always speak about Lipstadt v. Irving as I don't speak about Lipstadt's victory, I speak about Irving's defeat.
Okay.
Wasn't important. I like Deborah Lipstadt. She's a colleague of mine, a friend of mine. But her victory wasn't important. His defeat was all important. He also, remember, was the most informed, the most quotation mark scholarly of all the Holocaust deniers. Ahmadinejad is gone, and I know, I understand very well that Rouhani may not have said everything we wanted, but he clearly said that the Holocaust happened, and therefore that was Iran's way of saying, let's get into the world of at least sanity. So hardcore is not a problem, softcore is a problem. Softcore occurs in 4 different ways. It occurs when we make trivial comparisons to the Holocaust. It occurs in the theory of double genocide. There are 2 theories of double genocide. One theory of double genocide is that in the area, for example, in Ukraine, you faced a German genocide, the Nazi genocide, and a Soviet genocide. And the 2 are somehow equivalent. Timothy Snyder speaks of it as bloodlands, but Timothy Snyder understands very well that the Holocaust itself happened and that in terms of the appearance of the world and the understanding of the world, it is the defining event of 20th century humanity. And consequently, he's trying to say, let's look at it a different way. That is soft core delusion of the Holocaust. It's diluting it. It's as if you're pouring,
Equally worse.
which is not equally worse. It's problematic. But Snyder is a great historian, and he's also a great storyteller. So if you read his book, Bloodlands, it comes alive. Therefore, it makes it much more difficult to counteract.